Hello, and welcome to the Spicy Pod Sleep Stories. I am Michael, and tonight we will relax with a story about a centuries-old vampire bound by a vow to never feed from or harm humans again, and a lonely but strong-willed human woman who unknowingly stirs something he thought he had buried long ago. The fog had settled thick over the coastal village, draping everything in a hush that felt too soft to disturb. Elena stood at the edge of her new garden. The hem of her sweater tugged between her fingers, eyes scanning the tree line beyond the stone wall that framed the back of the cottage. It was quiet here. The kind of quiet that filled your bones, that made every breath feel deeper. But beneath the stillness, something pulsed, something old. She didn't know why she'd chosen this place. Not exactly, only that it felt like somewhere she could begin again. The air was different, the silence honest. The kind of silence that didn't expect anything from her. It was her third night in the village, and already the locals had offered polite warnings about the forest, about the cliffs, about the man who lived beyond the veil of trees. If he lived at all, she hadn't seen him, not yet. Only stories passed over tea and candlelight, shared with wide eyes and half smiles, like they didn't quite believe them anymore but weren't ready to stop telling them either. She brushed her fingers across the ivy-wrapped gate at the back of the garden. The metal was cool, damp, with the salt-heavy mist that never seemed to lift. A shiver trailed her spine. Not fear, exactly, just the sense of being watched. She turned. Nothing, only the trees. Tall. Still. Elena exhaled and stepped back into the cottage, closing the door gently behind her. She didn't lock it. The fire was already dying in the hearth. She settled into the armchair near it, tucking her legs beneath her, and letting her gaze drift across the dancing shadows on the floor. Her mind wandered to the path she'd seen behind the garden. It wound toward the cliffs, toward the woods. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling she would walk it soon. And when she did, someone would be waiting, not to harm, but perhaps to remember something long forgotten, something like desire, something like her. By the time the firelight began to flicker against the cottage walls again, the fog had rolled in thicker than the night before. It clung to the windows, pressing close like a secret trying to get in. Elena moved through the space slowly, each step measured, as if she didn't want to wake whatever the village had buried long ago. The path behind the garden had been calling to her all day, not loudly, not with force, just a gentle tug, like a thread of curiosity, wound around her ribs, pulling her ever so slightly toward the trees. And so, with a lantern in her hand, and her coat clutched tightly around her, she stepped beyond the gate. The metal creaked, the ivy sighed, the forest didn't move. There was no wind, no bird calls, only the rhythmic hush of her boots on damp earth. As she followed the trail winding toward the edge of the woods, it wasn't fear that filled her chest, it was anticipation, the kind that quickened the blood in her veins, the kind that whispered of something waiting in the dark, not danger, but something impossible. She reached the clearing where the forest thinned and the trees stood like guardians, and that's when she saw him. At first, he didn't move, just a tall silhouette at the very edge of the woods, half swallowed by the mist, cloaked in black, pale face just visible beneath the low brim of his hood. He wasn't watching her. He was waiting. Elena's breath caught, not from fright, but from the strange stillness of him. He didn't shift his weight, didn't breathe like people do, and yet there was no malice in his presence, no dread, only intensity, and something quieter beneath it. Regret, perhaps. She should have turned back, should have said something, but neither of them moved. The air stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions, and for a moment she swore the silence held words only the two of them could hear. Then his eyes, sharp, silver dark, met hers, and the world changed. Not all at once, just slightly, like the tide pulling one grain of sand away from shore. The next day passed like a held breath. Elena wandered through the village, aimless, but never far from the thought of him. Not the idea of a man, but him. The way he stood without moving, the way his gaze had found hers, as if he already knew her name. No one else spoke of him, not directly, but she noticed things. The way the old woman at the bakery hesitated before selling her bread, muttering something about the woods keeping their own. The way the postman averted his eyes when she asked if the trail was safe. By dusk the fog returned, curling through the cobbled lanes and seeping beneath doors. And just like the night before, she found herself standing before the ivy-wrapped gate with her lantern in hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. The path welcomed her like an old song. The forest, so still it felt alive. Every leaf seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow deepened around her. She walked until the mist thickened, and then there he was again. Not where she had left him. Closer now, no hood this time. His hair was dark and tousled by some unseen wind. He stood half in shadow, his coat catching the lantern's golden flicker, and his eyes. She remembered those eyes. Storm gray, endless, a quiet ache buried inside them. "You came back," he said, voice smooth and low, like velvet against a pulse. "You were expecting me?" she asked, unsure why her voice trembled. "I hoped." That one word undid something inside her. She took another step forward. The lantern swung gently at her side, casting arcs of light between them. I don't know your name, she said softly. He smiled, faint and slow. And yet you came. Elena tilted her head. Should I not have? He looked at her then, as though she'd asked something impossibly intimate. His voice was nearly a whisper. Most people run from what they don't understand. And you think I don't understand? I think you will. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. They stood there in the mist, not touching, not speaking again. But something moved between them, a pull, a promise. The first slow ache of something beginning, and when she finally turned to go, he didn't follow. But she felt him there, in every breath she took. The morning light felt foreign after the night before. Elena had barely slept, her dreams blurred with fog and moonlight, with silver eyes watching from the trees. She moved through the day like someone half remembering a melody, distracted, spellbound, caught in the afterglow of something she hadn't touched but could still feel on her skin. She hadn't even asked his name, and yet it didn't feel like they were strangers. The villagers said little now. They simply looked at her longer, more carefully, as if waiting to see what she would become. She ignored it, or tried to. Her mind belonged to the forest now, and to him. By the time dusk returned, she was already walking. The gate opened without resistance, the ivy brushing her shoulder like a welcome. The air was cool, scented with earth and something softer, like old cedar and rain. Lantern in hand, she followed the now familiar path, heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. He was there again, leaning against the low stone wall where the woods broke into clearing. Less shadow this time, more man, and though he didn't move, he watched her come, like she was the only thing left worth watching. You came again, he said. His voice held that same quiet gravity, the kind that settled into your bones without asking permission. I didn't want to wait another night. His lips lifted slightly. Neither did I. She stepped closer until only a few paces stretched between them, close enough to see the way his eyes caught the faint glow of her lantern. There was something haunted in his gaze. Yes, but something tender too, something that wanted. Will you tell me who you are? She asked, her voice soft, inviting. He was silent for a long moment. Then, Lucien Vale. It suited him, sharp, ancient, yet somehow soft at the edges, like a name whispered through centuries. And you? He asked. Elena Rivers. The sound of her own name in his voice startled her. It curled through her like warmth, like something sacred. They stood in the hush of the clearing, the silence between them charged. His hand lifted, not to touch her, but almost. Just a flicker of movement, as if he were remembering what it was like to want. Elena, he said again, lower this time, You should be careful with your heart. Why? She whispered. Because I've lived too long with nothing, and I would not know how to let it go once I had it. And there it was, that delicate, dangerous thing between them, not spoken, but undeniably there. Elena didn't remember lighting the lantern. She only remembered wanting to see him again, to stand in that strange, quiet space between fear and fascination, and to feel that charged silence settle between them like breath before a kiss. The fog had returned as it always did, but tonight it felt thinner somehow, less like a boundary and more like a curtain waiting to be drawn back. The woods felt warmer, closer. He was already there, waiting by the edge of the stones, the shadows dancing over the dark collar of his coat, his eyes steady on her. Lucian, she said this time, letting the name bloom in the air between them like an offering. His smile was faint, but something about it made her chest tighten. It sounds different in your voice, he murmured. She came closer without meaning to, as if her body remembered what her mind hadn't dared to admit, that she trusted him, that something in her reached out to him long before her feet had stepped onto this path. I thought of you today, she said quietly, more than I meant to. He looked away, just briefly, like her words had touched something fragile. You shouldn't. Why not? Because it would be easier if you didn't. She didn't answer. Instead, she came to stand beside him, their arms almost brushing, his presence wrapped around her like a cloak, cool, still, ancient, but beneath it was a current, a hum, like something barely restrained. You're not what they say, she whispered. No, he agreed. I'm much worse. She smiled then, not from amusement, but from recognition. He was warning her, and she wasn't going to listen. Do you always wait here? She asked. Only for you. The air between them grew heavier, as if charged by the very act of being close. Her breath caught. She looked up, and his gaze held her, like hands might, gently, reverently. But he didn't touch her, not yet. Instead, he said, tomorrow, come deeper. Into the wood? He nodded. There are things I want to show you, things I've kept hidden for too long. Will you tell me what you are? Lucian's eyes darkened, not with malice, but longing and something older. When you're ready to believe in more than stories. She didn't flinch. She only whispered, I already do. The wind moved then, just slightly, as if the forest itself had exhaled. The next night, the air felt different, still damp with fog, but warmer, more alive, like something old and wild had stirred just beneath the moss and roots. Elena's lantern barely lit the path ahead, but she didn't need it. She was drawn by instinct now, by the invisible thread that always led her back to him. Lucian Vale. She said his name in her mind like a talisman, each syllable tasting of dusk and something forbidden. She didn't know what he was, not fully, but she knew how he made her feel, seen, awake, as though every other version of her life had been sleepwalking until now. He waited beneath the ancient yew tree, its limbs gnarled like they'd watched the world age. He stepped forward when she appeared, eyes already tracing her face. "You came," he said again, though this time it wasn't a question. It was a truth he'd already felt before she arrived. "You asked me to—" Lucian offered her his hand, not forcefully, but gently, as if the moment itself might shatter if moved too quickly. She hesitated only long enough to feel her own pulse quicken. Then she placed her fingers in his. His skin was cool, impossibly smooth, but somehow it didn't chill her. It steadied her, grounded her, and yet it felt like stepping off a ledge. Together, they walked deeper into the woods. The trees grew taller, the canopy tighter. What little light her lantern offered was swallowed whole, but she didn't fear the dark. Not with him. "You still haven't asked what I am," he said quietly. "I don't think I need to." "Why?" "Because I already feel it." Lucian stopped, turning to face her. They stood between trees older than the village, in a hush that felt holy. His eyes searched hers, not for fear, but for understanding. "I'm not safe, Elena," he said softly. "Not in the way you deserve. Maybe I don't want safe." His breath caught just slightly, and then, so gently it felt, like a dream, he brought her hand to his lips. Not quite a kiss, not quite restraint, just a breath away. "Elena." She tilted her head, stepping just slightly closer. "Show me." And in the silence that followed, the forest held its breath. Lucian led her through the hush, past ancient oaks and knotted roots, deeper into the part of the forest that no one dared name. The trees here stood closer, their branches arched like cathedral ceilings, sheltering the path in dappled shadows. They said nothing at first, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It shimmered with questions, with heat, with the pull of something neither of them dared name. Eventually they reached a clearing. The moon broke through the canopy here, silver and full, casting light over a pool so still it mirrored the stars. Moss carpeted the ground, soft as velvet, and wild flowers glowed faintly along the edge like the forest's quiet breath. Lucian stopped, let go of her hand. He turned to her, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. "I haven't brought anyone here before," he said. "Why me?" His gaze was steady. "Because you didn't run." She stepped closer. "Tell me the truth." He didn't look away. I was born long before this village had a name. I've watched empires rise and fall. I've forgotten what sunlight feels like on my skin. And yet here you are, she whispered, because I remembered you. The words landed like a spell. Lucian moved slowly, as if approaching a flame. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingertips lingered just a breath too long. She didn't move. Elena, I drink blood. She exhaled, but not from fear, from relief. Because now there was nothing left to hide. I know, she whispered. His eyes widened, just slightly. I guessed it before, she said, but it didn't change how I feel. He looked at her then, with something close to reverence. You should be terrified, but I'm not, she said softly. Lucian stepped closer, the edge of his coat brushing her leg. The moon caught the sharp lines of his face, his mouth hovering inches from hers. I would never hurt you, he murmured. Not even if I lost myself. She reached up, her fingers just brushing the edge of his collar. Then don't lose yourself. Stay with me. And for one suspended moment, it was only them. His breath against her skin, her heartbeat against the silence, and the heavy promise that neither of them could take back. But he didn't kiss her. Not yet. He only whispered, tomorrow, come back again. And she would. Oh, she would. The air was warmer the next evening, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and dusk. Elena followed the path without hesitation now, her lantern swinging low as she moved through the woods like someone who belonged there. She didn't need to wonder if he'd be there. She felt him before she even saw him, like a shift in the air, a tug just beneath her skin. Lucian stood by the water again, coat unbuttoned, shirt open slightly at the collar. The moonlight kissed his throat, and something in Elena's chest fluttered, like wings against a cage. You came, he said, softer this time. I couldn't have stayed away. He watched her approach with that gaze that always made her feel undone and entirely whole at once. When she reached him, he held out his hand, not to lead her, just to feel her, to be near. She slipped her fingers into his. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. You're afraid, she said quietly. Not of what I am, he murmured, but of what I feel when I'm with you. Her breath caught. Because it's too much, she asked. Because it's real, he murmured again. His fingers traced the edge of her wrist, slow, reverent. I haven't touched someone like this in centuries, not with care, not with want. She leaned in, close enough that their foreheads nearly touched. Then do it now. A tremor ran through him, barely there, but she felt it. I want to, he breathed, but I'm not sure I'll stop. She tilted her face to his. Then don't stop. His lips brushed hers, not a kiss, but the promise of one. A moment drawn so tight with tension it could only snap. And then he did kiss her. Deliberate, slow, aching. It wasn't hunger, not the kind he'd fed for lifetimes. It was need, deep and human and unbearably tender. She leaned into him, arms around his neck, and he folded her into him like he'd been waiting lifetimes to do so. But just as the kiss deepened, a branch cracked nearby. Lucian pulled back instantly, every sense sharpened, protective instinct flooding his posture. Elena's heart pounded. "What was that?" she asked quietly. He scanned the trees, eyes glowing faintly. "Not a threat," he said after a moment, "but someone's watching." The night held still. Lucian exhaled slowly and turned to her again, brushing his thumb across her lower lip. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we finish what we started." And just like that, he disappeared into the trees, leaving behind only the memory of his kiss and the echo of everything they weren't ready to say. The next day, the clearing looked the same, but Elena felt different, changed, marked by a kiss that still lingered on her lips, haunting the corners of her thoughts. She hadn't slept, not really. Her dreams were fevered things, full of moonlight and shadows that whispered in Lucian's voice. Tonight she wore no lantern. She didn't need to see the path. She knew it now, as well as she knew the shape of her own longing. Lucian waited by the pool, his coat gone, sleeves rolled, pale forearms catching the silver light like polished marble. He stood with his back to her, still as stone, but the moment her footsteps touched the moss, he turned. "Elena," his voice, rougher tonight, a little less composed. She moved to him without words. There was no need anymore. His hands came to her arms, warm despite his cold nature, thumbs brushing the silk of her sleeves. He searched her eyes, gaze burning with restraint. He could no longer fully hold. "You shouldn't be here," he said, even as he pulled her closer. "I didn't come here to be safe," she breathed. He let out a sound, half growl, half sigh, and then kissed her again. This time, with none of the hesitation that had lingered before. The kiss was deeper now, darker, as if the dam had broken, as if he'd finally let go. His hand slid to her back, her neck, his mouth devouring hers like something sacred, and she met him with all of it. Every breathless answer, every unspoken ache. When they parted, just barely, their foreheads touching, Elena whispered, "Did you mean it when you said you remembered me?" Lucian's eyes, shadowed and full of something ancient, flickered with emotion too deep to name. "I've seen lifetimes," he murmured, "but yours, I never forgot. Not in any of them." Her breath caught. His voice was almost a vow. "You were always the one I couldn't reach, until now." And then, As if summoned by their closeness, the wind stirred. The same wind that once shrouded his secrets now wrapped around them like a blessing. The trees swayed, the pool shimmered, and somewhere beneath it all, the night held its breath again. But this time, it didn't interrupt. This time, there was no one watching, only them, finally alone, and the moment, at last, was theirs. The forest had gone still again, but this stillness was different. It wasn't caution or waiting, it was reverence. The kind that settles after something sacred has been shared. Elena stayed in Lucian's arms, her fingers gently curled into the fabric of his shirt, her cheek resting against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, deliberate, like it had just remembered how to beat for someone else. He held her there, unmoving, except for the brush of his fingertips along her spine. It wasn't possessive, it was tender, like he didn't quite believe she was real yet. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Neither of them was counting. "I don't want to leave," she whispered, her voice barely stirring the air. He pressed his lips against her hair. "Then don't." She looked up, their faces inches apart in the hush of the moonlight. "Tell me more about the memories, about what you meant." His eyes shifted, not away, but inward, as if he were reaching for something old and buried deep. "I've seen thousands of faces," he said quietly, "but yours, it always found me, lifetime after lifetime. A glance in a market, a laugh in a storm. Sometimes just the feeling that I'd forgotten something important, and then I'd see you, always just out of reach." Elena's breath caught. "But we've never met, not until now." "No," he murmured, "not like this, not fully. But something in me has always looked for you." She didn't know what to say to that, so instead, she touched his face, lightly, fingers grazing the sharp line of his jaw, the edge of his lips, the fragile curve beneath his eyes. Her touch was soft, but he leaned into it like he'd been starving for it. "Maybe we've always belonged to the same night," she said. He smiled, faint and raw. "Or maybe I've just never let go of you." They stood that way until the breeze shifted again, carrying with it the scent of rain. Not a storm, just the whisper of something beginning to fall. Lucian glanced up, then back to her. "You should stay here tonight," he said. "The rain, it will pass before dawn, and I can keep you warm." She hesitated, only long enough to remember that she was no longer afraid. "I want to," she said. So he led her, slowly, to a hollow sheltered beneath a ridge of moss-covered stone and the curtain of trees. He gathered an old woven cloak from beneath a dry ledge, the kind only someone centuries old might keep hidden there. When he wrapped it around her, his arm stayed just a moment longer than necessary, And then he lay beside her, not touching, not yet, just near, close enough for warmth, close enough for dreaming. The rain came gently, like a lullaby, and in the quiet that followed, the past and the present seemed to blur, folding them together beneath the hush of falling water and the watchful moon. The rain had softened to a whisper, brushing the forest like a lullaby, but Elena remained awake. Lucian hadn't moved in hours. He lay beside her, eyes closed, brow smooth, too still to be sleeping like a man, but not tense either. It was as if he was resting in some other way, as if simply being near her was its own kind of peace. She studied the shape of his profile in the dim light. There was a softness there that he rarely let show, a loneliness too deep to name, worn like armor for centuries, and yet now there was something else flickering behind it, a memory, a shadow, a stirring. She didn't know what made her reach for his hand, but the moment she did, his eyes opened, not startled, just there, present. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, voice low and warm. "No," she murmured, "but I don't mind." Lucian turned toward her, their hands resting between them. He looked at her for a long moment as if trying to decide something. "I had a dream," he said. "Was it about me?" He hesitated. "It was about us." She waited. "I saw you in a different time. You wore blue silk, and your hair was bound with silver pins. You stood beneath a balcony covered in roses. You looked up at me, and I remember. I loved you then too." Elena's breath trembled. It felt real. It was real. I've dreamed that moment for years, but tonight it was clear, like the fog had finally lifted. He sat up slightly, back against the mossy stone, his gaze distant now. "There's something in this place, in this forest, something that remembers." Elena rose to sit beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it." His voice was barely a whisper. "But this isn't the first time we've found each other. Not in this lifetime. Not even in this form." She blinked at him, her pulse quickening. "I think we've done this before," he said. "Over and over. Each time I forget a little less, and each time it brings me closer to you." Elena reached for him, cupping his cheek. "Maybe this is the time it lasts." His eyes closed briefly beneath her touch, but when he opened them again, they weren't just glowing. They shimmered with something ancient, something neither of them fully understood. And far beneath the roots of the forest, something stirred, a power long buried, watching, waiting, drawn to the bond reawakened beneath the rain. Not all memories are held in the mind, some live in the blood, in the soul, in the ache of a kiss that has crossed centuries. And tonight, the forest remembered too. They were sitting side by side, quiet as the forest itself, the hush of rain barely brushing the canopy above. The cloak still wrapped around them held the warmth of shared silence, but something inside Lucian had gone taut. Elena felt it, not in his words, because he had none, but in the shift of his breathing, the stillness of his hands. He was holding something back. She could feel it rising like a tide just beneath the calm surface of his voice. "Lucian," she said softly, "you don't have to protect me from the truth." He looked at her then, and for a moment, he wasn't the careful, composed man she'd come to know. He was wide open, raw with want, burdened with centuries of restraint. "There are things," he began, voice rough, "about me, about what I am." She waited still, steady. Her gaze didn't waver. His fingers flexed slightly against the stone beneath them. "I've never wanted someone to see me the way you do, not since I first became what I am. It's dangerous to let someone in like that. It makes you remember how lonely eternity can be without them." A gust of wind sighed through the trees. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "You're not alone anymore." Lucian closed his eyes like the words pained him, or healed him, or maybe both. He turned toward her then, slow and deliberate, and the look in his eyes nearly undid her. Not just longing, ache, reverence. As if she were the one thing in all his lifetimes he could never quite hold. "I want to tell you everything," he said. "Who I am, what I've done, what I haven't done, because of you." "Then tell me," she breathed. He leaned in then, not for a kiss, but to press his forehead against hers. And just when the truth seemed ready to fall from his lips, the forest shifted. Something changed. A presence, heavy, ancient, not malicious, but undeniably powerful. Lucian stiffened. He lifted his head, listening to the trees like they'd whispered his name. "Elena," he said, voice suddenly sharp with instinct, "we're not alone." Her heart leapt. Before she could speak, he stood and offered her his hand, gentle but urgent. "Come with me. There's something I need to show you, something you were always meant to see." Lucian moved swiftly, but without panic, guiding her through narrow paths barely lit by the sliver of moonlight slipping through the branches above. His grip was warm and certain around her hand, and though he said little, she could feel it in him. Something was unfolding. Something long buried was drawing near. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest grew, not in fear, but in reverence. The trees parted for them, the wind stilling, as if even the earth itself held its breath. And then they arrived. A clearing opened before them, filled with silver light. In its center stood a shallow pool, still as glass. The water was so perfectly smooth it reflected the night sky with impossible clarity. The stars above mirrored below, moonlight dancing over the surface like ripples of memory. Lucian stepped to its edge, motioning for her to follow. "This is where I remembered you," he said, "for the first time in this life." Elena looked to him, her breath caught. "I came here when the ache of you was too loud to ignore," he continued. "Even before I knew your face, I felt you here, like you'd left a mark in the soil, as if this place was waiting for you to return." She knelt beside the water, watching its surface ripple, not from wind, but from something inside it, a shimmer beneath the reflection, like something was alive within it. "It's called the mirror," Lucian said quietly. "It doesn't show you what is. It shows you what was and what always has been." She looked up at him, her voice barely a breath. "Will it show me you, us, if you're ready to see?" He reached for her, his fingers brushing the side of her face. Her skin burned where he touched, not with heat, but with something older, a recognition, a calling. She turned her gaze back to the water, and slowly, slowly, the stars shifted. Images began to form beneath the surface, soft, blurred at first. A woman in golden silk, a man with the same dark eyes, a kiss stolen under the blood-red moon, hands reaching through fire, a voice whispering a name across time. Her name. Elena gasped. She saw herself again and again, across centuries, always finding him, always loving him. Lucian knelt beside her, his voice a hush. "I told you, this isn't the first time." She turned to him, eyes wet with something too vast to name. "And maybe this time," she whispered, "we don't have to lose each other again." He leaned in slowly, and this time she met him halfway. Their lips touched, gently, reverently, as if each was trying to memorize the shape of the other's soul. The kiss was not rushed. It was the unfolding of lifetimes. And above them, the moon burned brighter. The kiss didn't end with a breath. It lingered. Time stretched around them, the forests falling into reverent silence, as if nature itself bowed to their reunion. And when they finally pulled apart, their foreheads remained pressed together, eyes still closed, neither ready to speak first. For words would only break what silence had cradled so perfectly. But the moment had already begun to shift. The pool shimmered again. A tremor passed beneath them, not from the ground, but from the space between worlds. Lucian felt it first. He rose to his feet slowly, offering her his hand again. "It's begun." "What has?" "The remembering," he said, voice cautious. "Not just for us. The mirror wakes more than memory." She took his hand, stood beside him. "What else?" His jaw tightened. "The ones who guard it. the ones who have always tried to keep us apart. Before she could ask, a gust of wind swept through the clearing colder than before. The trees groaned, ancient, warning. The surface of the pool fractured into ripples, distorting the visions until they faded into silver shadows. "Come," he said. "We're not safe here anymore." They moved swiftly through the trees, but Elena could feel it, the difference now. The air had shifted. It wasn't just memory they'd woken. It was something aware, something bound to their bond, as if each kiss, each realization fed a flame too bright to stay hidden. By the time they reached the small cottage nestled on the edge of the forest, the one Lucian had kept for years, forgotten by time and untouched by others. Night had fallen into a deeper shade, the kind of night that felt like it could swallow stars. Inside, the hearth sparked to life at his will, not with matches, with a whisper. Elena stepped closer to the warmth, trying to shake the chill in her bones. What happens now? Lucian stood behind her, close but not touching. Now he wanted to say, "Everything we've been holding back," but instead he said, "Now we rest. But soon, I'll have to tell you the whole truth." She turned slowly. "Even the parts you swore never to say aloud?" His eyes met hers, endless as the dark between stars. "Especially those." And as the fire crackled and the storm gathered again beyond the windows, she knew whatever had been set in motion would not stop, not until every echo of their past had returned, not until their love either conquered or was torn away once more. The fire burned low, casting soft amber shadows across the stone walls of the cottage. Elena sat, curled in a worn chair, wrapped in one of Lucian's linen shirts, the sleeves brushing her knuckles. He stood near the hearth, unmoving, save for the slow rise and fall of his chest. She could feel it. He was holding it back, the weight of what he needed to say pressing against him like the night itself. He looked at her finally. No mask, no veiled charm, just eyes that had seen far too many endings. "Elena," he said quietly, "there's something you must know about us, about what happened the first time I lost you." The fire cracked, the sound sharp in the hush between them. She didn't speak, only nodded. She was ready. "I wasn't always like this," he began. "Not the way you see me now. Once, I was human, mortal. And I loved you then too, fiercely, recklessly. But the world we lived in wouldn't let us stay. You were taken from me by illness or by war or something crueler each time. And I couldn't bear it anymore." He knelt before her then, not to beg, but to bring himself closer to her warmth. "I made a choice centuries ago. a pact with something ancient to become what I am, so I could protect you, find you again, and never lose you to time. Her breath caught. He reached for her hand gently, but the cost was steep. My soul fractured, my name forgotten in parts of history. I was cursed to wander unless you remembered me too. Elena stared at him, heart aching with 100 emotions. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure if this time would be the one, he whispered. And if it wasn't, I couldn't bear to see fear in your eyes. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. Oh, you, she murmured. Do you think I only started loving you in this life? Lucian's eyes closed and his shoulders fell, not in defeat, but in release. She held his face between her hands. I don't care how many lifetimes it took. I'm here. I remember. And I'm not going anywhere. Outside, the wind rose, but inside, the silence wrapped around them like a vow. Lucian leaned into her touch, brushing the softest kiss against her palm. Then it's time, he said. For what? She asked. For us to stop running from the past, for us to stop hiding. And then the fire behind them flared high. The mirror had been watching, and others were coming. But so was the end of the cycle, the moment that would ask them both, what are you willing to risk for forever? The next night fell without stars. Clouds moved like dark wings across the sky, and the wind carried a low, pulsing hum that stirred the trees into unease. Elena stood at the edge of the clearing, where the mirror had once shimmered, where truth had first begun to rise like heat from the ground, and felt it, a presence. Lucian was beside her, silent but certain, no longer holding back, no longer hiding from what he was. The ones who had long watched the mirror were waking. They did not come as shadows or beasts, but as stillness, as memory made flesh, ancient forms wrapped in the hush of the forest. They stood at the edge, watching. You brought her here, one of them said, a voice like rustling leaves. You opened the thread. Lucian stepped forward. She remembers. This time, she remembers everything. The guardians of the mirror didn't move. Then you both know what this means. Elena felt it in her chest, the throb of something old, woven through her blood. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about pattern, about breaking it. We know, she said softly. To love again was to risk again, to challenge the rules set in place to keep the balance. Each lifetime they found one another, the universe tilted, trying to hold the scales. Each time, the love they forged was too strong, and something would tear it away. unless they chose differently now. Lucian took her hand. "We're not asking for forever," he said. "Only the chance to stop being punished for loving each other." The guardians were silent then. "One path remains. You can stay in this life, unbound by the mirror, free from the cycle, but you will lose every memory of what came before. Or you carry it all, the truth, the love, the past, and bear the cost of never hiding again." Lucian looked at Elena. "The first means peace, the second means truth." She held his gaze and smiled. "I want the truth, even if it burns." He kissed her, slow and fierce, and the choice was made. The mirror shattered in silence, the sky cleared above them, and for the first time in all their lives, no one came to tear them apart. They stayed in the cottage by the edge of the woods, no longer in hiding, no longer fearing the turn of time. Some days he would trace her cheek and say, "Do you remember that kiss beneath the garden moon?" And she would laugh, "Which one?" And when morning came, they would rise before the sun, fingers twined, breathe warm against each other's skin, and watch the light return, not as strangers, not as fragments, but as two souls who had always been one, and always would be. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's story. Good night and sweet dreams.